Hi, I'm Gerard Daché, the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. I'd like to welcome you today to the monthly Emerging GovTech live stream that we do. And this is going to be a really exciting live stream. We're going to be talking about basically using blockchain to prevent government fraud, waste, and abuse. So let me just give you a little background on what started this whole thing. As many of you know, in the United States, with the new administration and DOGE coming in, there was a great deal of effort to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. And this caught on at the state level, it even caught on internationally. And so with tightening budgets, and we're currently in the middle, when we are broadcasting this in the middle of a government shutdown. So everybody's trying to figure out how to do more with less. The Government Blockchain Association is a membership organization with government members in over 500 government offices around the world. And many of them have been asking, how do we use blockchain to do this? And our members are members that have requirements and budgets, but they operate in all sort of sectors of government, right? Local, state, national, and international. They work in Department of Motor Vehicles. They work at Department of Defense. They work in land titling. Every sort of function of government. We have GBA members that are asking the questions: how can we use blockchain to make things better? So our working group, called the Budget Accountability and Transparency Working Group, led by Todd Carolyn, you'll get a chance to meet him in a minute. We came together and we said, let's put a report together. And we also do some work with the United Nations. They were very interested in the subject. So this group is actually putting together a report. They've been working on it now for several months, that we will be releasing at our conference called The Future of Money Governance and Law on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., October 30th. So we'll be releasing this report then or shortly after. If you're interested in getting a copy of the report, then you can subscribe to our newsletter. We'll put some information in the chat about the newsletter that you can subscribe. That way you can be the first one to read it. But that's what we're going to talk about today. We've invited the authors of the report on stage today. I'll be introducing them in a minute. And that's pretty much it. So with that, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about our panelists. Todd Carolyn, who I mentioned, he's currently with a federal contracting company called Eagle One Solutions. He's got over 25 years of experience deriving major strategic initiatives in the intersection of finance and technology modernization with both federal governments and private sector. His experience spans work with organizations in international development, biobanking, healthcare, energy, defense, and IT policy and compliance areas. So he's got a really, really rich experience. And as we first started talking about this, he was telling us about the experience he was having at USAID. And so hopefully he'll bring some of that rich experience to it. So he's done a lot of work at the national level. Rudy Livingston, he's a chief deputy auditor for Utah County, Utah. He's got approximately 30 years of experience in city and county finance operations as an independent auditor, accounting manager, budget manager, finance director, and deputy auditor. And he's served in leadership and committees for multiple statewide professional organizations and has presented at government finance on government finance topics all over the place, many different conferences. So he really brings a rich set of experiences for state and local. And then Paul Dowding, a dear friend of mine that I've known now for several years. He is a strategic advisor specializing in the integration of blockchain solutions with government financial systems, with over 20 years of experience in enterprise technology, digital identity, and secure infrastructure. He's led initiatives across public sector, finance, defense, regulatory compliance. Mr. Dowding has advised national and international agencies on leveraging distributed ledger technologies to enhance transparency, streamline operations, and mitigate fraud. He's a regular contributor to thought leadership on digital transformation in government. He's also the author of the GBA's Blockchain Maturity Models Banking Financial Services Supplement. He leads a banking financial services working group. He's worked with many different banks and financial institutions, a man of great integrity, probably the smartest guy I know in blockchain and financial services. So I couldn't be happier to invite our friends and colleagues to the stage. So let's bring them on board and let's have this conversation. Hey guys, glad that you can be here. I'm so excited about this conversation that we're about to have. Before we get started, I've already introduced you guys to the audience. Before we get together, I'm going to ask Todd if you could sort of share with me kind of your thoughts on why do we do this, right? What's the landscape? One of the things that we had planned to talk about is maybe the GAO report, some of the Gardner stuff. What are some of the challenges that have kind of led us to why this report that we're working on is important?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for having me. This is a great forum, and so thanks for the opportunity. So, you probably some of you out there can harken back 20 years to I think it was called the Waste book that was published by Senator Tom Coburn, and he was one of the first that was out there talking about fraud, waste, and abuse across government programs. And you can flash forward to the American Reinvestment Act, ARA, back in around 2007, 8, and then all the way forward to kind of what we've seen in the news transpire since the new administration came in, and DOGE and all the focus on programs and where funding is, and is it the right thing, is it the wrong thing? And so, there's been this constant ongoing struggle about transparency and the lack of it from the movement of funds, at the federal level. If you have $10,000 and you give it to your wife and say, hey, here's $10,000, where that money is. She's spending it. But if she goes out now and she's got that money spent by different people, you don't have any clear line of sight to how that money is spent, right? So we have a real opportunity here when we talk about modernization in the federal government across the system landscape to really start looking at ways that we can build in accountability by design and start really looking at ways to make the funds flow across the government much more transparent so that we have a better line of sight for how things have been spent, what programs it has been spent on, who's spending it, and is it in line with what agencies and oversight agencies have wanted to look at. So a lot of opportunity there. It's and I'll get into a little bit.
Yeah, let me pass it back over to Rudy.
Experience.
Yeah, let me pass it back over to Rudy. Rudy, from a sort of state, local, perspective, what do you think some of the problems and opportunities are, kind of Utah County, the state, and the folks that you're interacting with?
Well, our county is actually growing significantly right now. And so as we grow significantly, we have to make the best use of whatever our funds are. We don't want to go taxing people all the time. And so what we need to do is we need to see how can we do things more efficiently and more effectively. One of the problems that I've encountered quite a bit over my experience is that we have a lot of fragmented systems, that we have siloed departments that like to work in their own little, place. And so we can't always, sometimes it's difficult to bring those things together. In addition to that, we've been working with a legacy accounting system, which makes it very difficult for a lot of people to be able to see and understand what is going on in the actual day-to-day operations. And we'll talk a little bit about one of the pilot project that we're working on now. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I think it's really an important thing that we understand where the funds are going and how we can trace them, what's happening. And we, on a very local level, have to keep the public trust. And they are always looking for additional transparency. And so we're trying to, implement that more fully into what we do.
Yeah, and Paul, I know that you've been looking at this problem for quite a while, and I know you and I were talking about putting together a webinar or a series at one point about the problem. What's your perspective on the problem and the scope of the opportunity? Right? What are the opportunities for preventing fraud, waste, and abuse in government from your perspective?
Well, the key thing is there's a couple of capabilities within what is a distributed ledger or blockchain. It's a universal ledger. It's sort of asset agnostic. So it doesn't matter, although we're thinking about finance and tracking money, you can also track documents or even goods or items that are bought and transacted inside government. And so therefore it becomes a universal ledger. Another aspect of distributed ledger is, although you've got this ability to transact between like the revenue collection agencies, the taxes, the fines, the other sources of money to a government, and then you've got to the appropriations and the disbursement, and what Rudy said as far as fragmented systems. But within a distributed ledger, you're actually synchronizing the nodes, their subledgers, and therefore you've got a way to take those fragmented systems and have not necessarily replace them, but having a means to through subledger link them. That synchronization is a huge deal. And also to what Todd said, you really can expand the network so that the digital transactions go as far down the chain as you want transparency. So not just going to one department and then exiting, to an external party, and then the audit trail is lost. We can bring those parties into the network. So you've got this ability for transparency to a greater depth and the synchronization across the width. And also the fact that the blockchains operate relatively quickly. So you've got the ability to capture information and report it back very quickly. It's there's no delay, and that lack of latency is also a powerful thing. So those combinations of the universality, the synchronization, the transparency, and the speed are all the potential.
So, and that's a really great reason for why blockchain might potentially be a solution. Todd, what do you think from your perspective? Of the problems that we talked about, how does blockchain why is it really uniquely suited for solving some of these problems?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the experience at USAID, if I can. So think of an agency that has 16, 17 different bureaus. Its appropriation comes into the agency. The agency allocates that funding out to the bureaus, which then allocate that funding for the bureau level to the program level. Okay, now I specifically on the IT side had the challenge of trying to collect all the IT expenditures across the agency related to all these programs and how IT was being used in different missions through different countries. Think of 90 missions, globally, worldwide. And it was very difficult to do it the way the procurement and contracting systems and the accounting systems were set up. So there might be a payment through the allocation of the funds going to one bureau, and then those funds go out into different types of transactions, assistance agreement versus a straight contract versus a NICRA, which is a totally different kind of cost agreement. And it was very difficult to understand where the IT component of that funding was going into whatever country. And so if you had a blockchain, design system where all of those streams of those transactions are coming in onto the block, you have a much smoother way to trace those assets and that spending to that IT and where it's going.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we've talked about in the past before is the use and the integration of AI and blockchain, because you've got all of that data spread across all those different places. I do want to take a moment out and put a plug in for our sponsor, which is CES Network. CES Network's got so if you guys have not checked out CES Network, I'd encourage you to go to CESS.network. Their blockchain essentially is really made for using AI and blockchain. They allow you to segregate nodes geographically, so it's perfect for government. It has to restrict where it's using its data, and it also allows the training data and the training models to essentially be managed. So in dealing with some of the problems that Todd's talking about, having a solution like CES Network would be a great solution for that. Let me go over to Rudy for a second. Or actually, let me go back to Paul. So Paul, Tapestry X, which is a solution that you represent, that that really is a great sort of use case utilization of blockchain for bank and financial services, right? And managing all of this stuff. What are some of your thoughts in terms of what the problems are and why your implementation of blockchain or any others like yours might essentially be well suited for these kinds of problems?
Yeah. So beyond the benefits of what a blockchain and distributed ledgers have a potential to do, there are some unique requirements in terms of handling financial transactions. Depending on the size of the government, obviously the scale and the capacity, are issues that you've got to be able to handle a large volume of transactions and do it quickly. And there can be some issues related to that. Another point is that you don't necessarily want one big blockchain. There's a lot of sharing of data in blockchains. So you may want to have a network of networks, and that then relies on interoperability. And we know in the industry that's a problem in terms of how do not just blockchains talking to other blockchains, but actually two implementations of the same blockchain being able to transact with each other. And that was one of the key things that we recognize, that you have to have a network of networks and be able to transact between them in the same way you can transact between banking institutions. And the other side of it is an interesting aspect of our solution is we're able to synchronize. We put the controls right to the edge, so we're able to synchronize without the need of a validator or consensus. And therefore, that means the transactions have immediate settlement finality. And then when they're shared in to the other nodes, the nodes can synchronize based on the transaction data alone. And there's actually academic research that backs that up. The reason that's important is because if you do have a distributed ledger with a validator, you've got a cost, a risk, and a liability. And that's an outlet for potential abuse or corruption, which is you don't want to necessarily impose. And again, if you've got a network of networks, you've got a series of the cost, risk, and liability of all those validators. The most important thing in a financial ledger, which we thought was critical, was actually to have accounting. You're going to be a financial ledger, so you want to be able to record transactions, in the same language that they're captured. There's going to be multiple CRM systems and multiple ledger systems across all these different departments in any government. And they're going to want to record and talk back to a subledger in accounting language. But more importantly, and this is a challenge with some blockchains, is they're really not ledgers, they're perpetual state change logs. You've just got a continuous blockchain, and there isn't really a concept of a transacting period that you can reconcile or close. And I sometimes say some of the blockchains are technology of the future that forgot the future, because they can tell you what happened today and yesterday, but they can't record anything for tomorrow. And the only solution to that is a smart contract, but that's an algorithm that you can't project from, accrue to, or reconcile to. Whereas we actually have archivable transaction periods, and with double entry accounting, we can record future data payable receivables. And if you think a lot of things in finance or government, it's a lot about appropriations with the potential, the spend is going to happen in the future. You've got vendors that are providing invoices with payments to be made in the future. So without being able to record transacting periods and payables and receivables, you're actually missing a lot of what's required to be captured. And then I mentioned the smart contract, but that's a requirement to interact with many blockchains, and often it's redundantly recreating the life cycle. So again, looking at the challenges with blockchain and what we see in these implementations, obviously you've got to manage the scale and capacity, the interoperability, having a quicker way of validating or at least processing in real time is obviously key, and having an accounting-based ledger is critical. So those are the things that we looked at and believe are sort of critical for any sort of financial. Although, as I said earlier, one of the other benefits is that distributed ledger can capture other assets like documents or equipment or other things
let me summarize real quick, because I think this sets a baseline. So Todd, you started off by talking about the difficulty of accounting for, right? And you use the analogy of giving the money to your wife and then she gives it to her friends and et cetera, not knowing where the money goes. right? And I think that that's something that, and Rudy, we're going to get to your actual Live World pilot project that you're going on, but I don't think that there's enough emphasis or understanding that when you're looking at a project like this, to really understand how important and how valuable and valid accounting is, right? A lot of times they're focused on the transaction speeds and stuff like that, but they're not, one of the things that's really great about Paul's solution is that they've built, this is what you're looking for, a blockchain solution that really has accounting built in, as opposed to, trying to plug in and so, when you get all that disparate data. And then again, why I'm a big fan of SES Network is there's so much information and data, right? That if you want to be able to really mine that, but you're concerned about, government privacy, secrecy, stuff like that, something like SES Network is an incredible solution for that. But Todd, I want to ask you, Rudy, I want to ask you, and then Todd, I want to ask you from an accounting perspective, right? So Rudy, you've worked a lot at the local level. Todd, you've worked across USAID, Department of State, different places like that. And this isn't a political question, right? So I don't want you to say, ever since the election, whatever, and I know you guys wouldn't, but this is not a political question. It's not intended to be a hatchet job towards anybody. But across the landscape, how would you grade how you've seen governments account for taxpayer resources? And just a couple thoughts on how you think blockchain, might be able to resolve it. We're going to get into specific examples and stuff like that in a minute. But again, give it a letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F, and a little bit about, why or how you think blockchain might address what some of the issues are. So, Rudy, let me start with you.
A lot of it depends on, right now, without the blockchain stuff, a lot of it depends on your personnel. We're very fortunate that we have a top-notch, finance director and the one that's in charge of all the books and everything. So we keep things really well. And so I don't think in our current situation, that's a necessarily problem, except we do see that there are issues with accountability in grants areas and other things and figuring out where that taxpayer dollars to go. And so I would say, on some of the cities I've been at, I would give them a D. I think the county probably gets a B or a C grade, if you will, because there's a lot of things that we can do a lot better and become much more efficient in what we're doing. Some areas in the county, we may even be at an A, but overall, I would say we're probably at a B or a C.
All right. So what that sort of points to is a lack of sort of consistency across your experience. Todd, what about you? What letter grade would you give government, and how? How do you think blockchain might address it? And then we'll get into. And then Rudy, I'm going to go back to you with. I want to hear about specifically what you guys are doing in Utah County, and then Todd, I want to hear about specifically some pilots that you've been involved with.
Yeah, so I would give, at the federal level, I would give the government an incomplete. So, and the reason for that is, agencies are so vastly different, right? If you take an agency like HHS or what USAID was, a conglomerate of federated bureaus, right? And their systems are so big and so huge that changing them and transforming them is on a difficulty level much higher than another agency that doesn't have that confederation nature to it, might have a smaller financial system. So, and it really depends on what is it when we say accounting, what are we accounting for? Are we just accounting for the dollar? Are we accounting for how that dollar is spent on a program? Are we accounting for following that dollar to an asset like DOD and its constant challenge to try and identify lost assets? DLA has had this challenge for a long time. They're piloting a blockchain now to try and get a better handle on that. So you have to look at the agencies differently. Now, on a county level, what I find surprising, for instance, in my own county, which is an Oracle-based system, is they don't even utilize all the fields of a transaction in the Oracle system. So you go into that system, because I'm allowed to go in there, ask as a citizen of Montgomery County, which I have, and you find a lot of the fields blank, including invoice number, including vendor name. So, if you have a blockchain system where the transaction doesn't get completed unless all these things are put into the block and get their approval, you do a better job of really following all of the aspects of that transaction and identifying who approved it, where it went to, and whatnot.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's get into some real world use cases. So, Rudy, you guys are actually currently right now involved in a pilot project. You want to tell us a little bit about it and maybe any kind of lessons learned that you've got so far?
Yeah, interesting. I've been with Utah County for about a little over 5 years now, and I came in and I was a budget manager, and we saw a lot of areas where there were issues, and one of those that we and Commissioner Powers Gardner, who's also been, she was actually the auditor before she became a commissioner, so she's the one that brought me in. And we've seen that in the health department that we've had some major issues. The county's been growing at an incredible rate over the last several years. And, people say, well, don't the cities pick up a lot of stuff? A lot of stuff, no. The health department has to function for the entire county. And so when the county population grows, it puts a lot more stress and strain on things. And we've seen a lot of issues with them running at a deficit for several years now. And we're trying to figure out a way that we can overcome that deficit. A lot of the operation or the funding that comes in the health department comes from federal and state grants. And so what we've decided that we're going to do a pilot program, and we're working on this with our software vendor right now, to develop a blockchain to track those grants throughout the operation. One of the other issues when you're dealing with grants is quite often they span multiple years. So we get a 2 or 3 year grant, and so you have to be able to track that. Whereas, as Paul talked about, the blockchain doesn't really close things off, but we in the accounting world, we have periods, and we close things off at December 31st. That's our year end. And so if we don't have something that carries that on beyond that, it's a little bit difficult to track those issues. Not only that, we get awarded a grant, and then we have to spend the money, and then we have to seek reimbursement for that grant, those grant funds for the funds that we expended. And if we don't have a good handle on where the money's going, that it can take a lot of time for the people in our health department specifically to track these things down, put reports together that can be submitted to the agencies. And so often, we're putting the money out, and then we're waiting a month or more to get the reimbursement submitted, the request submitted, and that makes it very difficult. Well, additionally, in the health department, we have probably 12, I think, different bureaus or operations in there, and each one of them is a little bit different. We want to be able to track those things. So our pilot program, we are going to be working using an AI component that's going to pull things out of our financial system and put them onto the block. One of the issues we have too is that we don't have a significant staffing level. We try to get by with the least possible, and so we can't add an additional burden to our staff to set these things up. And so what we're working to do is so we can track those grants all the way through to the subrecipient level, and then it makes it easier for us to follow and find out where those funds are going. We're focusing on the grants. There's other areas we will be looking at in the future, but the grant areas where we're starting right now, and we think that can have a big impact on us. Additionally, one of the things Paul mentioned, I think, is the contracts. It's smart contracts are a huge piece of the blockchain. I think that's a really good application.
Don't get Paul started on smart contracts.
Yeah.
We'll be here all day.
They have both their utility as well as their downside.
Let me just sort of comment on something you said. Then I want to turn it back over to Todd, and then Paul, I'll bring you on, and you can specifically talk about smart contracts, because I think it's an important part of the discussion. You mentioned the use of AI, and I did earlier. One of the biggest problems with AI is that you can't trust it. And so for folks that are looking to incorporate AI into their analysis, if they're doing anything with a blockchain, I'd really encourage them to look at the blockchain maturity model. And there's an artificial intelligence supplement, right? Which actually all the supplements, the Banking Financial Services supplement. But if you go to gbaglobal.org, in the slider, you should see something on the BMM. If you go underneath resources, there's a drop down to BMM. But I would really encourage folks if you're putting together a blockchain solution and using AI or just you need to make sure you can trust it, by all means, please look at the blockchain maturity model. Todd, Rudy talked a little bit about grants. Do you have any experience with grants? Haha.
Yeah.
A little bit of experience with grants. Yeah. My experience with grants was when I was at NIH, and the problem with grants has always been understanding the performance of the grant with each tranche of that grant and the traceability to where that grant goes and who's performing on it, before you get to that next, okay, I'm going to give Rudy another piece of that grant, right? And so that's been a challenge, and the grant systems within the federal government they're very there's a lot of different grant systems. There's been attempts to really get to trying to consolidate to have more of a shared service in terms of grants across the federal government. It hasn't worked yet, so there's a huge opportunity there.
You want to share, and this kind of bleeds into a little bit about maybe some of the challenges to adoption, but you've been involved in a couple grant programs, and you've seen some challenges. What are some of the challenges to adoption that you've seen in terms of try to bring more accountability and traceability to the grant program?
I think, to be honest, I think there's one aspect of a fear of not wanting to be transparent for whatever reason. Just the culture has been, I don't need to show you that level of transparency. Why do you need it? And I won't get into the why about that, but
we address it. We address it in the report, don't we?
Yeah.
Right. So again, for those that may have been joining a little bit later, this whole conversation is essentially associated with the report that the Government Blockchain Association is doing called Preventing Government Fraud, Waste, and Abuse with Blockchain. If you're interested in getting a copy of the report, please subscribe to the GBA newsletter. Go to gbaglobal.org. Or also attend the event that we have on October 30th, 2025, called The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law in Washington, D.C., because that will be releasing or announcing the report at that point. But Todd, in the report, and I know you don't have to mention any names, maybe if you can use sort of a generic government agency, right? Talk a little bit about actual attempts to use a blockchain solution to bring transparency to the grants program. And again, like I said, you don't have to use a real government entity. But I think the viewers would really gain from an understanding of the non-technical issues that are barriers.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of the stuff that's been tried is public, so I don't think there's any harm in mentioning. I mean, the HHS Accelerate program was one that really attempted to go and do a better job of consolidating procurement systems and moving towards more of a blockchain design initiative. And when the leader of that agency left, the CIO, that initiative kind of fell apart. So, that's one. There's been other attempts at the Department of Treasury. One was wasn't so much on the budget level, but it was tracking the use of mobile phones, where they could identify the mobile phones that were on the block to see what was active, what was inactive, so they could say, hey, these phones are inactive. Do we really need these? Let's go and recapture these assets. So, that's a good thing, right? Where you can use that to manage assets. I mentioned DoD earlier, and it's I think it's still ongoing, the pilot that they're using to really track the custodian of different expenditures through the logistics process. What else can I think of here?
Well, and let me ask you a question. So if we're going to sort of drop down into categories of why these things didn't work. But by the way, there are some that I think have worked well, right? SymbiChain, for those of you that don't know, they've got a blockchain solution, and I think that they've done some work with the different military components. tracking supply chain of I think missiles and stuff like that, all the way down to the screws. I think that they've done tracking of aid to Ukraine. But SymbiChain, also a GBA member, phenomenal company that really can. I've seen them do a lot of stuff in sort of supply chain tracking. But so there have been some good successful projects. But in terms of failing, right? If we had to drop it into categories, right? One of them is sort of just people's resistance to new technology, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other one is people talk about wanting transparency, but they don't actually want it. So any comments on that? And then I want to go to Paul and talk about some of the non-technical barriers might have been.
Is that put to me?
Yeah. And then after you, then I'll throw it over to Paul and ask what is some of the
I think, with any real revolutionary change, when we talk about technologies, there's always that reluctance to accept and adopt, right? And, if we're a bunch of, octogenarians at the agencies and we're all working on stuff, we're not going to want to change as much as our kids are, right, that are coming in, because they're so familiar with new technologies. And so part of it is that willingness to accept change, where you are in the organization. And so that's a big part of it. The other part, I think that it's really the understanding of the technology itself, right? And being that level of digital literacy where you know how the system works, the cryptography, what you might need to do with your identity to use the system and things like that. I think that plays in as an issue. And then on the supply side, the education of people to do these systems and to be able to modernize these systems. And, I think we need to build our workforce. We talked, 10 years ago, how we needed to build our workforce to understand cloud. And now we're talking about building our workforce to understand AI, and blockchain's kind of been left off on the periphery. And I think we need to really bring that in and incent incubation for that technology and how we build it in and use these tools.
I once was having a conversation with the ICT minister in Cameroon, right? And I was in her office right outside the president's area. And so she reported directly to the president. And the president had just won his re-election for the 38th year in democratic elections, right? And she said, we're interested in blockchain in all of its applications, except for voting. Our election system works just the way we like it. Right. And sadly, I think that that's true. But my opinion has always been, right, and I'm going to sort of mention Rudy here, is that we need to take blockchain into the easy places first, right? When I was in the military, one of the things that we never did is we never took green troops into intense combat situations, right? We never wanted to do that. And so what we wanted to do is essentially take them into the easy places, allow them to get, to develop, to get stronger, to know what they're doing, right, to become more solid, right? And then they can handle tougher stuff. What we want to do as a society right now is look for all the places where there's corruption, right? The deepest bastions of corruption, and say, let's put blockchain there to solve the problem, right? And those blockchain projects are going to have their lunch eaten, right? Where we really need to do is go to places like Utah County, where there already is a great deal of integrity, where they say, yeah, we want to take credit for the integrity that we have. And that's where we build out the technology. That's where we make our mistakes. That's where we develop all the stuff. That's where we build the buy-in that we can then start taking it into, a harder to reach corners. And so, Rudy, I really applaud the work that you and Amelia and that whole team is doing, because you guys are demonstrating to all the other people in places that, hey, yeah, this is something that can be done. So I really totally appreciate what you guys are doing. Paul, from a technical perspective, right, there have been a lot of blockchain projects in and out of government, right, where they've really tried to make blockchain work for banking and financial services, right? what have been some of the challenges to adoption in some of those areas? Where does it kind of leave the industry? And then from there, where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's to try and not sort of denigrate government so badly that everything's a problem. It's a question of like why are we in this situation where we are? And funny enough, in the financial services, part of the challenge is that for every product, for every type of security or instrument in any region, you've got a completely different infrastructure. And the reason for that is that they grew up in their little silos and they were paper-based processes. So when the technology came along, it automated each of the infrastructures uniquely. And it didn't necessarily, think of them being consolidated. And really the banks and brokers are, for want of a better expression, a layer 2 that interacts with all these infrastructures. But there's a toll and an expense associated with that. One of the benefits of blockchain, its universality, is to link those infrastructures, not necessarily replace them. It can eventually get down, but it can actually link them. And if you think in government, building on what Todd said about an incomplete, I think in the Pentagon with their failed audits, they also have a note saying the dog ate my homework. Yeah. But the point is that each of these departments probably grew up with their own procedures and paper-based, and again brought in their own technology individually because they're trying to do their job as best they can. But when you're not thinking holistically, and that's hard to do across a sprawling government, you've got all these individual processes. So you've got the same challenge in terms of what's really happened is you've set yourself up to make it hard to track things, not necessarily. So most of the transactions are being done optimistically or with integrity, but there is these avenues for waste, fraud, and abuse because of all the disparate nature. And so there's again within the idea of capturing these, what's the challenge here is if you ask yourself why are we in this situation, but doing it for just a pragmatic way as opposed to pointing at fault, then you understand why blockchain is the next step in terms of, while it's creating efficiencies as Rudy says, it's a transformative technology and it's doing things in a different way. Think about the early internet. Everyone had a website and claimed they had an e-commerce strategy when they really didn't, and it's only later on that we understood what it really took to make the internet work from a commerce perspective. In the same way, blockchain is just by having a blockchain doesn't mean you're going to be in a better place. And that's the thing to sort of take into consideration.
I want to, so Todd and Rudy, I want to get a chance to answer that question, what's sort of the pathway forward. But what I'd also like you to do, Todd, maybe you can pull up, I know I didn't ask you to do this before, but maybe you could pull up the report. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we cover in the report. But Rudy, let me start with you. What pathway forward? I'm really curious. Do you have any lessons learned from the project that you're in now, or is it still too early? And what do you think the pathway forward is for local and state government?
I think it's really a little bit too early because we're at the we just got a scope and scope and concepts that we put together and where we want to go. But I want to comment something. One of the biggest obstacles is that right now we're going through the process of implementing a new ERP system in the county. And I've been through some of these before, and that is a major process. I think there's a fear for a lot of the people out there that, oh no, not one more thing, right? And it gets back to that. But I think what we're looking at is finding ways where we can have successes, where we could prove that it's a successful thing for the people involved. And once we do that, then we can start spreading that out into other areas throughout the county. So I think that's what our major operation here is. If we can, once we get this squared away so we can have this functioning properly, we can show the staff, say, wow, this is actually making your job easier in a lot of ways rather than harder. And on top of that, we can make the elected officials look at this and they can say, wow, we know what things are happening in there. And I think that's really a key factor of what we're trying to do moving forward, is opening up the doors so that we can make things better for the employees, the public, the elected officials, and everyone. So I think that's really where our focus is now.
Yeah, no, that's terrific, and it really kind of goes along with my philosophy that I just echoed a little while ago about it's important to start small, get some wins, demonstrate that, right? You build the buy-in. Because look, this is a paradigm shift, right? The concept from sort of centralized government to sort of decentralized governance, where you don't have to trust the person, right? You can trust the system, right? Because it's rules based, right? And it's transparent. That's a major paradigm shift, and that's not one that's easy. But your approach, I think, is exactly the way we need to do it. And I really like the idea of understanding the organizational institutional resistance. It may be that they don't want to show what they're doing. It might be job security. I did a consulting gig for this one company, and the CTO knew a particular technology that was really hot and cutting edge like 10 years ago. But because he didn't want to show his lack of knowledge and understanding of the new technologies, he was unwilling to let any new technology enter into their ecosystem.
Yes.
Right. So you have a lot of these sort of human dynamics that, if you want to implement a blockchain, it's not just the technology. You really have to understand the people. And it's a whole change management thing that, you can't overestimate. Todd, interested to hear from you. Pathway forward. What do you think?
A couple of things. I think first of all, we have to have policy intervention. We have to have governments at the local level and the federal level really, helping to prove what the business case is, where the use case is. And that also means we need to have, CFOs, CIOs working collaboratively to really get those use cases and their value out front and saying, hey, if we did this using blockchain, here's what we're looking at. Here's how we're going to avoid waste in the medical, and healthcare arena. Here's how we can do a better job of managing grants and the savings that we're going to see from that. Here's how we're be able to track assets through supply chain and not have loss, and those types of things. So we need to have that kind of almost like centers of excellence, if you would, that look at different ways to utilize blockchain in those industry sectors and what the benefits are, as well as the government coming in and also incenting and creating challenge programs to get agencies to get on board.
Yeah. One of the areas where I think that blockchain could be a huge benefit is in the area of emergency management, right? Because whenever there's a disaster, right, FEMA comes in or whichever government agency is responsible for this in that jurisdiction, and they basically say, we got to get money out to everybody as soon as we can, right? And it's urgency, right? And I don't know if any of you have ever been contacted by a Nigerian prince, right, or the IRS or somebody like that says, hey, or your heating or electric company in the middle of the winter, right? Your gas company says it's like minus 20 degrees outside, and they said, if you don't pay your bill for $200, we're sending somebody over in a truck right now to cut off your heat, right? One thing scammers always attempt to do is create this sense of urgency, because when the urgency is there, all of a sudden, concern, discretion kind of goes out the window, right? And in emergency management situations, whether there's a hurricane or flood, the government's like, we got to get this money out. So the controls essentially are not good. And then we always get a report later about millions and billions of dollars that essentially were wasted because, we didn't have controls. So that's one of the areas that I personally have an interest in terms of how blockchain can solve those kinds of things. If we can have a process in place where we could put money in, right, distribute those funds, account for those funds, that would be a great thing.
And Gerard, to your point on as a local agency, we've been the recipient of those funds, right? And it's not any different here because we're trying to get people out to do the work and get things done and everything, and they don't get tracked properly. So I totally agree with that concept.
Yeah, I think it's a huge area.
Could I just say one thing on that, Gerard?
Yeah, sure.
So the UN's World Food Program did a great job with building blocks, designing their system that was used by their hundreds of network partners in distributing aid into the Ukraine, using that model to really reduce aspects of fraud and as well as duplication of aid going to recipients.
Yeah, and so let's go to that. I want to give Paul a chance to weigh in briefly. Let's go to the report and talk about what's in the report, some of the recommendations. One of the things we're looking for, if anybody who is listening to or watching this live stream, we're looking for resources that we can publish, present to government employees that work in over 500 government offices. So if you go to the GBA website, it's at gbaglobal.org, under resources, there's a drop down, and it's I think Web3 solutions. If you go on that, there's a place for you to, if you have a solution that you would like government to be aware of that can help use blockchain to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, then by all please let us know there. There's a form at the bottom, and we want to hear about that because we are putting this directory together. We will be sending it to government officials literally all over the world. And if you've got a solution you want them to know about, this is a great way for that to happen. So, Todd, so I'm going to do Paul quick on any thoughts about the pathway forward, and then let's talk through the report briefly for people that might want to download it and get access to it. So, Paul, any thoughts on the pathway forward?
Yeah, I think when it said it's a sort of transformative technology, so you've got to understand, how is it going to be used to help bring more clarity, consistency, transparency, and control to these processes? And then understanding that, one of the benefits is, like I said, is it's a consistent universal ledger, so it can talk to all the aspects, and it's relatively easy in distributed ledgers to configure additional nodes or additional accounts within the system. So when you were talking about the emergency, the problem is that you're often reliant on legacy rails where, a certain amount of funds may be distributed outside of government, and then it's supposed to be redistributed from there, but you can lose track of where the money's gone or who's actually the recipients. And it's very easy to sort of add digital recipients to a network and say, I'm actually giving you a credit. Now, there still has to be the interoperability, because ultimately if the money has to go through a payment and legacy rails, but you really want that endpoint to be the true recipient. And therefore, you've got this ability to very expand or contract a network to allow you to both control temporarily and track everything. And that's part of, the pathway forward is to truly understand how the technology is different and why it works and why it's going to help in these understandings. So then you can actually better plan your use case. If you're just thinking, I'm going to do the same thing faster, better, cheaper, you're just missing the point. There's this ability to do things that have never been done before, and that's the key to the pathway forward.
And Paul, your background really is in operations, right? I mean, people think, you sound like you're a technologist, but your background really has been in banking and financial operations. Can you talk, and Rudy, you may want to tag onto this a little bit. Can you talk about the importance of not focusing on the technology first, but focusing on the operations? And then once you have, and this is really the approach you took when you built the BMM financial management supplement, right? The importance of defining the use case and the requirements, and then selecting the technology for that. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, the technology is, I don't want to upset all our technologists out there, but it's really just automating a process, and so you still have to, within an operational process, define the workflow, the controls, understand the productivity, the capacity, the bottlenecks. So if you've got a workflow of the process, you then understand how the technology has to be worked optimally. Now, the cool thing in technology, and I'm at the edge, you've got these abilities to have parallel processes, different data structures. There's all these tools that can make the technology, but you really have to design the process flow around the process and then the technology together. If you just apply the technology as it stands, a fast computer can hide a lot of, inherent problems in the process, controls or efficiencies or capacity. And it's only when you strain it. So that point of, understanding the actual workflow of what you're doing, as opposed to just throwing in the technology day one. Let's spaghetti against the wall and see what happens, and then improve it from there. And one of my challenges with the industry is you've got a lot of data scientists and technologists, and you've got a lot of product guys and salesmen, but you really need not necessarily the accountant, but the bookkeeper, the operations person, really to opine upon, because they're the people that understand the logistics and the productivity and really the control. And one of the key things in finance which is operations 101, is you have what's called dual control or segregation of duties, meaning the person who can initiate a transaction can't settle it or record it, and the person who's adjusting the ledger can't initiate transaction. And the problem with current blockchains is that you've got access to the ledger as a participant, and therefore that's where the corruption can easily happen. What we did was separate that so that you can reference the ledger and initiate transactions, but then it still has to be validated before it's posted, and that's how you can also put the controls to the edge. But things like that, as much as, and I'm the first one to say I'm disrupting TradFi, but it doesn't mean you have to throw out all the traditions or benefits of what's out there in terms of operational control. You're just using them in a different way, and that's the key thing.
Rudy, you hear that, right? He's talking to you, because you guys are right.
I echo everything that Paul just said. That's really it. The boots on the ground people are the ones that have to understand and they have to buy into this, because we can do whatever we want. And if we impose something on let's say our accounting clerks or whatever, and say you're doing it this way, guess what? It's not going to be successful. We have to understand how things work to make their jobs better and more effective, and take care of things that way. So I totally agree with that concept.
Yeah, one of the big problems we've seen is people saw blockchain, and then they wanted to essentially shove a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, we got this blockchain. Let's put it in banking, without understanding. And this is all stuff that I've learned from Paul, that in a financial system, you've got to be able to do future data transactions, right? You might have to do fractional reserve accounting, right? You might need to do trial balances. And it's like, let's put the blockchain in, and then now all these problems arise. And so years later, the pilot project fails because they never thought about the requirements and the business operations first. So, Rudy, I'd encourage you to talk to Paul. One of the reasons why he was elevated to the board of GBA is because in all of these problems and situations, he was able to very, very quickly look at the process, identify the bottlenecks, and find a fix. So I'd encourage you guys to get together.
That is really a paramount importance, doing that and understanding it. So,
well, Todd, we're just about out of time. I wanted to spend some time talking about this incredible report. Todd is I would call him the primary investigator of the report. He's done all the heavy lifting. We've just sprouted off our ideas and opinions. He's been the muscle behind this. So you want to talk about the report briefly? And then
yeah, sure. I'll just, kind of syllabus, the quick notes is, we start with the landscape, the why are we here, talking about, blockchain in terms of what the problem has been in governments, either federal or at the local level, even, internationally. And then we'll get into the challenges and opportunities around that. What we discussed here in terms of what have been some of the blockers, right? What have been some of the things that have held people back from implementing and adopting. We then get into a nice list of use cases across a variety of areas in terms of blockchain being tested and various pilots and initiatives. Provide you with some resources that you can utilize, and links to the BMM for the maturity model, and then kind of ending with a number of recommendations that we have for what should be considered. So I think you'll find it really interesting, and look forward to getting it out there to everybody.
Yeah, awesome. So if folks want to get the report, again, go to the GBA website, subscribe to the newsletter. Before the report is published, that'll be how people get it. Once it's published, it will be on our website. And then if people have resources that they would like to contribute on the GBA website, underneath resources on the main menu, there's a link to Web3. It's Web3 directory. That's what it is. So let us know about your solutions there. Paul, Todd, Rudy, it has been an absolute delight and pleasure to have you guys. I know I always learn a lot talking to you guys, and I'm sure the viewers of this did too. So have a great day, and I'll see you at the working group where we're going to continue working on this report.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.